Hello, today we're going to talk about our final writing strategy, which is peer editing. So, in thinking about what peer editing is and why use it, basically it is guided instructions that you provide to students to edit a classmate's paper. You could also be able to give them a checklist to edit their own paper, but in my experience, I've always found it's easier for students to critically think about someone else's paper than it is their own, especially for ninth and 10th graders. 11th and 12th graders typically have a better maturity or a better grasp on their writing and can handle it more on their own, but I do think it's more helpful to have a second set of eyes look at someone else's paper. Students also tend to struggle to edit their own work. They either never find the time to do it, or when they edit their work, they don't really know what to look for. So having this checklist also is teaching them how to go about editing their own paper so that when they are in college, if they don't want to bring their paper to a writing center, they at least have some tools for how to handle editing and revising their paper on their own. It also gives students ideas for how to revamp or modify their own essay. If they read someone else's written work, they can kind of get ideas on how to phrase things or things that they could include to enhance their own paper, and it just gives them more of a variety and a more diverse population of writing to look at. So there are two main peer editing options that I have found helpful in my classroom. The first is a peer editing option one, gallery walk. What you would do for this is you can have students bring in their paper at any stage of the writing process. I've had students do a gallery walk with their entire paper. I've had them do it with one paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, but no matter how much writing they're bringing in for the gallery walk, what you do is you have every single student have a post-it note, and they write down one concern or a question that they have about their essay on that post-it note. And what they'll do is they'll leave the paper at their desk along with the post-it note stuck to the side on the desk next to their paper. And then you give everyone a small stack of post-it notes. These post-it notes are a place for them to be able to rotate from various papers in class and be able to leave feedback about that student's essay. Whether it's focused on the concern or question, or if they had a different observation, they can really leave a note about anything on their sticky note, and then they'll also stick it onto the desk underneath the original sticky note from the writer of the paper. And what you do is you will have students rotate around the room leaving feedback. I tend to give students 5 to 7 minutes depending on what they're reading, sometimes 10 minutes if they need it. And they can go anywhere in the room that they want to. That way they can kind of move to their friends or they can move to a stranger. It just gives them a lot of freedom to move around the room and give feedback. And then at the very end, to help them sort of absorb their feedback, I have students read over their comments and they fill out an exit ticket. And they note what they learned about reading other people's essays, and they also kind of absorb the feedback that they got and then sort of talk about what they'll do to improve their essay. Whether it's based on the feedback I got on my sticky note, I will do this, or if it's based on, I saw so-and-so do this in their paper and I liked that, I might want to incorporate that in some way in my paper. All in all, I enjoy this a lot, and it also helps alleviate me having to have the stress of trying to check in with every single student, which may not be possible in a class of 26, or when I have 3 sections of one class writing a paper, so I might have 75 students. This gives them another way to have more feedback and more eyes on the paper. The second, more teacher-intensive option for peer editing is to do an editing checklist or peer editing checklist. So for this, you would create a step-by-step to-do list or checklist that explicitly states what you want students to do. And then what you'll do is, working with a partner, students will go through the checklist or to-do list and complete the feedback tasks that you have outlined. With this, it's really important to give explicit things that you want them to do. So you really want to think about, if you think they might struggle with analysis or with their thesis, or maybe you want them to look at commas being used or not being used. You want to add all of those things onto your list so that way they know concretely, I need to do this and then move on to this. If you want them to write feedback on the paper, or if you want them to be asked short answer questions to fill out on the sheet to give to that person, that's something that you want to consider as well. The ultimate goal is to ask yourself, what do I want the students to do before they hand the essay in to me for editing, and kind of work off of that. So here's an example of a self-editing checklist that I used with my level 2 juniors. The first part is to have them write down their concerns. So things that they really would like their peer editor to look at or address when they are reading over the essay. Then I've broken it down into a second part, which is the initial review. And what they have to do is they have to look at format, and they're required to check off to make sure that that person has done this. And if they haven't, to make sure that they actually write a response to remind that person to do this. Then they move on to actually reading the paper. So they sit down and they carefully go through these items and they evaluate the different parts of the essay. Again, they are being asked to check off items that they notice the person doing. If they haven't done that, they then need to write a comment telling them to do so. And then I have a list of 4 different tasks they have to complete as they are reading this first time under the first section of the paper. Then under the middle part of the paper, I've broken it down with, again, a checklist and some tasks for them to complete, questions to answer, or things to mark up on the paper. And then students move on to a second reading. They also will move on to a third reading. And again, you have different tasks to complete with each layer of the reading. And then you leave them with the overall impression and then the final evaluation. This does take an entire class period if students are doing a proper job with it. As the teacher, what I'll normally do is I will migrate around the room and I'll answer questions. Sometimes they lack a little bit of confidence on marking someone else's paper. They always want to make sure, like, is this definitely where the comma should be? Miss Joyce, they've done this. What do you think about this? They like that reassurance, so I do provide that while they're going around. I also just sort of migrate around and make sure that they're on task doing their job. And then normally I save 5 to 10 minutes at the end of class where they will switch papers and they will read through the feedback. And then as a class, we will talk about things that they noticed, things that they felt were helpful within this session, and it just gives them more information to then go back and revise their essays. For this particular one, they had to bring their entire rough draft with them, so their peer was reading anywhere from 2 to 6 pages, and they were giving a lot of feedback in return. So that brings us to the end of our peer editing module. I hope that you were able to learn a bit more about how to get students to engage in peer editing to have more polished and revised and modified essays. Also, I want to thank you for tuning in to all of the modules that myself and Kira Wiggin have put together. We've enjoyed making these for you guys, and we hope that you have gotten some helpful information from watching them.